I want to tell you how much of a pleasure it is to join you here today. I wish I could join you in person, but 2 days ago I would have had hip replacement surgery. I'm hoping that I don't continue to limp. Some of you who know me have seen me limping around for a number of years. But I wish I could be with you in person. But I do want to share with you some thoughts about the criminal justice system at the Minnesota Justice Forum, where you're attempting to put the genie back in the bottle. I inquired about that label, and I said, when did the genie get out of the bottle? And it's hard to pinpoint that time. The Constitution adopted in 1858, both of them, made it disenfranchisement of felons. I sometimes think that the genie started slipping out in about 1989, when we started to go with harsher, more draconian sentences with respect to violators in our society. But anyway, you know, as you're addressing the issues today, I'm reminded of what my professor at Macalester, Dr. Mitow, said. You're seeking proximate solutions to insolvable problems. I'd like to think a little bit more optimistically. I think that there are some solvable problems here, and there are some solutions. And I hope that we can get to them. In that context, I think we're in a period of time, what I can say is that, borrowing from A Tale of Two Cities, the best of times and the worst of times. I say it's the best of times because I think the table is being set where broader parts of society are willing to look in a reasoned and thoughtful way at how we deal with people who interact with the criminal justice system. Just recently I was at a program where Senator Amy Klobuchar talked. It was dealing with transition of felons back into society after they served their time. And she said that it was dealing with amicus, that I was involved with amicus before it was cool to deal with the issue of reentry. Well, I'm not sure that it's cool. I'm not sure that society has gotten to that point. But, I mean, the very fact that she speaks that it could be cool, and the very fact she's talking about Congress proposing legislation to deal with rehabilitation, that's optimistic. That means that there may be the chance to come up with solutions to the problems that we all know exist. But it's also the worst of times because borrowing a title from a book about Congress and its inability to get problems solved and the whole issue of district, in some ways it's worse than you think it is. And let me talk about some of those areas that cause me concern. When I joined the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeals in the early 90s, there were two big discriminatory issues on the table, one with respect to gender, the other with respect to race. I think we've done reasonably well with respect to gender. We surely aren't there. We can see that issues still exist. Race still continues to be a major problem in our criminal justice system. A lot of comment says is that we may have overt discrimination. There is some. A wise deputy sheriff from Dakota County once said, it's policy, not that we're overtly racist, but it said, I have witnessed that as we go through the system, at each step we tend to be a bit more harsh for persons who are different from this, persons of color. That happens at the arrest stage or the detention stage, whether you arrest, whether you sort it out at the site or you sort it out at the courthouse, when you charge, how you charge, sentences at disposition, probation conditions. And he said his history told him is that we tended in the system to act more harshly every step of the way with persons of color. And the end result is that we have an inordinate number of persons of color in our prison system, and we have an inordinate number of people who have to live with the collateral consequences of a justice system that does in many ways discriminate. And I think that we need to do a better job of dealing with race. And I'm going to say another thing is that we need to deal with this issue on a societal basis. In 2008, I was asked to give a speech about the United States in a post-racial society. It was just after the election of President Obama. And I refused to speak on that topic because I said we are not in a post-racial society. Obama, Colin Powell, and some others have been able to transcend the issue of race. But we are far from being in a post-racial society, and I was even so bold as to respect that there may be more overt racism once President Obama takes office. I think that has proven to be true. I think some people feel that because we have an African-American president, they can be more overt in their racial expressions. And that attitude in society carries over to the criminal justice system. And so I say to you, anybody who, and you know what I'm talking about, that subtle racism that emerges with respect to our president and how that works. I mean, you see these cartoons that said, president is stopped by a police officer, and what's the charge, officer? Being president while black. We have to stop this attitude, any context to say that racism in any form is acceptable, because it isn't. And if we don't speak up, things won't get better. Now, how does this whole attitude carry through to society? Well, it has an impact with respect to collateral consequences, which is your topic today. And is that the collateral consequences, I just recently dealt with cases about that with respect to expungement. And when I say it's worse than you think it is I think a couple of recent cases from our court illustrate that point. Is that we are unforgiving in our society, and is that comes through is that we are unwilling in many cases to allow for an expungement. See, I've been a part of the judiciary for over 21 years, and is that the judiciary can deal with mercy and compassion. I know judges who are willing to exercise mercy and compassion. I know judges who are unwilling to do it, thinking that society does not want to have us show any mercy and compassion. But expungement falls into a broader area that the courts can't deal with, quite frankly. That's forgiveness. Forgiveness is the mandate or the province of the people. And unless we will change and we actively work to change the attitude of the people, we're not going to change in this area. What I mean basically is the courts are not going to provide the solution here. It has to come from the legislature, which is more directly related to the people. Let me give you an example of how this whole expungement thing plays out. It's the case of MDT. 20-year-old woman, married, working, generally low-paying jobs, got a GED for her high school graduation. She's suffering from a cold. She goes to the doctor, gets a prescription for Robitussin, 200 milligrams. She knows that may not be enough for her, and so she knows also that she can't afford to lose another half day of work. So she does what I would consider a very klutzy forgery. Puts the number 4 over the number 2. And she goes to the pharmacy, and here's what I mean about how things carry harshly. The pharmacist could have said, I'm not going to fill this prescription and let it go at that. No, the pharmacist calls the police officer. The police officer looks at it, takes her down to the police station, turns it over to the prosecutor. The prosecutor, the city, then turns it over to the county. And the next thing you know, this young woman is charged with 3 felonies. 2 felonies, 10 years in prison, $10,000 fine. 1 felony, 5 years in prison, $5,000 fine. Now, she wants to get on with her life, so she agrees to plead to a charge. She gets draconian probation requirements, fulfills those requirements, goes on to school, getting B+, A-, A's in her coursework, got a college degree. She wants to get a job in society as an accountant, and she can't get it because of her past record. So she wants expungement. She goes to the court. The court grants the expungement. The court shows a little compassion and mercy. Prosecutor appeals. Goes to the Court of Appeals. Again, a bit of mercy and compassion, and the expungement is allowed. Comes to our court, and our court reverses. Now, the opinion of our court is not unprincipled under the law, but it surely does show a lack of concept of forgiveness and the medical consequences. Now, why did this prosecutor pursue it so harshly? I've described that syndrome as Inspector Javert syndrome from the movie and the play Les Miserables in the book. And understand that Inspector Javert is not a villain. He is just misguided. And there's this exchange between Jean Valjean and Inspector Javert, and Jean Valjean says, "Sir, where is the humanity?" And Inspector Javert says, "But I am the law. I represent the law. I must enforce the law. I have no choice in the matter. I must do what the law mandates." Well, no. Is that there is room for humanity in our system, and I think we need to convince the people we need a little bit more humanity. And so, as I end, is that I could talk about other issues. I could talk about where I see some misdirected efforts to treat witnesses like medical examiners as the province of the prosecution instead of independent witnesses. There are a number of other areas where I see that there is a lack of humanity in the system. But I'm going to go on to what my final point would be. I want to compliment you for what you're trying to do today. And what you're trying to do is change the system. And that's why I come back to it's the best of times, because we have people like yourselves sitting down talking across the broad spectrum. You have legislators, you have policymakers, you even have one or two prosecutors there, where you're trying to figure out how we can make society better and change things for the good. And this is where I want to focus upon what I think you're about. I always used to talk when I was a judge about the legacy question. I talk about people who are in position of elected of office, position of responsibility, those who can change and direct policy. It is a privilege to serve in the role that you are right now. You know, opinion makers, change makers. You have the opportunity and the privilege to make a difference. But when you are placed in that position, whether it's a judge or a police officer or a legislator, you need to understand the responsibility that goes with that position. And you need to be willing to answer what I refer to as the legacy question. Given that privilege, you need to figure out a way that you can make things better, that you can use the privilege given to you as a position of power and authority to change things for the better. I talk about it as the legacy is, how are you going to answer that question of a grandchild, great-grandchild that comes to you and says, "Grandma, Grandpa, things weren't that good in the early part of the 21st century. There's a lot of discrimination, a lot of harshness in the criminal justice system. I've seen these statistics. We have imprisoned an inordinate number of people of color. What did you do? What did you do?" Well, as you sit there today and try to come up with solutions, think about what you're doing is that you are preparing to answer that legacy question so that you can say to your grandchild, your great-grandchild, "Well, I tried to do something, and let me tell you what I did." So I urge you, I applaud you as you go about trying to answer that question, that legacy question, saying, "I made a difference, I did something, I showed up, and I tried to make things better. And by the way, we did."